Welcome everyone. My name is Mike Guidry and I'm the curator of public art of the University of Houston system, which is one of the oldest and most significant university public art collections in the United States. And I'm delighted that you're joining us this evening for our 6th Color Talk, which is a monthly series of conversations where we connect virtually with the artists of Colorfield, UH's first curated exhibition of outdoor sculptures. The show is on view through May 2021 and features artworks by 7 artists who all work in a variety of approaches that address color. This evening, the New York-based artist Sam Falls is joining us in conversation. So before we begin the talk, I just wanted to talk about the course of the evening. A 40 to 45-minute conversation followed by a Q&A session at the end. So please submit your questions at any time throughout the talk, and I will do my best to get through as many of them as I can at the end. And we also set aside a little time at the very end for a quick survey. So let's begin. Hi, Sam. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. We're excited to have you. I'll just do a super bio and then we'll start talking. So Sam was born in 1984, raised in Vermont, and as of this week, lives in New York. He received a from Reed College in 2007 and his MFA from ICP Bard in 2010. Sam has had numerous group exhibitions nationally and internationally and has also been collected worldwide. So Sam, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your upbringing, and how you were introduced to art?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And let's see. I mean, I was born in California, grew up in Vermont. My parents were divorced, so I went back and forth and kind of grew up on a small farm in Vermont and then spent summers in LA with my dad. And it was kind of I guess in a nice way, a dynamic upbringing, as well as, felt like I traversed back and forth a lot. And I think that pull between the 2 ends of the country has kind of been influential in terms of, I guess, like an allegiance to, or non-allegiance to, kind of different atmospheres. And relative to like the environment, I've always felt comfortable going between the 2 spaces. And then growing up on the farm in Vermont, eventually I came around to feeling like rebellious, and I guess, wanting to move to a city and not having a super big drive to stay on a farm and my whole life. And eventually moved to New York to finish my MFA, I guess, is what brought me full circle. And being in a city, like, kind of inversely pushed me back to being in nature. And I guess that's not a very succinct description of my upbringing, but yeah, I don't know how to explain it. Sorry.
So when we talked earlier, your mother was an artist or did kind of craft work that was nature oriented, but she dissuaded you from pursuing an art career, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, she paints botanicals on silk, and in a very realistic or hyper real. She's a very good draftsman. And so I remember as a kid just being really frustrated because I couldn't come near representing images or plants the way she would when I'd hang out in her studio at our house. So I was drawn to math and science, and my dad was an aerospace engineer and worked at NASA. So I kind of like felt like that was interesting. And also, yeah, my mom did say, it's not a great way to make a living and being an artist. So she encouraged me to always take art courses. And when I was in college studying physics, I consistently took art courses just to fulfill my general education requirements. And, you know, I really liked doing it, but it wasn't something I thought of as a direction for my life until I took this course, the philosophy of science at Reed College, which was really based around linguistics and logic and like looking at Saussurean linguistics, and that kind of trickled down into the Frankfurt School and Walter Benjamin. And I got really interested in visual studies and how, you know, images signify, and, you know, iconography and things like that. So eventually I transferred to philosophy, and finally art was also the area where I had the most credits, ironically, because I had consistently been taking courses there. And yeah, when I finished, I did more of an art history major, but then I went to get my MFA to pursue making art after that.
Mm-hmm. And that was at Bard.
Yeah, it was at Bard at the International Center of Photography. So I was in the city, and Nayland Blake was running it, which is really what drew me to it, because it was on paper a photo video program for the MFA, but you know, when I had gone to visit the school, Nayland actually had to show up in the city, and it was these really kind of elegant trash sculptures that he had been making.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought the combination of him running the photo program somehow made a lot of sense to me. And also Moira Davey was teaching there, and her book Long Life Cool White had come out recently, and so it wasn't a traditional photo program in a lot of ways.
And is that where you, I mean, but your kind of relationship or fascination with nature, for lack of a better term, that sort of started at an earlier age? Wasn't there like a pivotal moment
Yeah.
in your years?
Yeah, right. Yeah, there was a pivotal moment. Yeah, because, you know, I had been drawn more, like growing up in rural Vermont, I wasn't necessarily camping in my free time until these people I worked for generously gave me the gift, like my junior year of high school. So I must have been 16 or 17, to do a NOLS program, like the National Outdoor Leadership School. And I was in the Wind River area of Wyoming for a full month, and traversing the area, backpacking, and, you know, isolated from anyone except the small group of kids I was with and the teachers. And eventually you're on your own, and then doing a solo. And it, by the end of that month, I remember feeling totally alienated from like everyday life, and a lot of the kind of things I had placed value on in society previously, from money to relationships. It all felt a bit superfluous, and nature had really taken a hold of what I thought was the most important part of life in a lot of ways, which, you know, I've balanced out going from there, but it's held a place in my mind, and it became something that I really pursued. I mean, kind of even in physics, but then trickling down to a micro scale in the work I do now.
I mean, what happened out there during that month? Like, were you in saying, like, did you have a moment? Like, I'm not going to use the word epiphany. Sorry. I mean, like, you know, what kind of experience was that?
I mean, in the beginning, it was really tough because I hadn't backpacked before, and the NOLS program, I think, it's interesting because you're with 12 kids, and some are like very privileged kids who want to do it, and then there was a few kids who were sponsored and had been through like a rehab program, and were more doing it to enter a new way of seeing things. And I was somewhere in between. Like I was up for it, but it was also kind of seemed like something in the way of my high school summer when I had first learned to drive. And so in the beginning, I was a bit ambivalent. I just remember the first 2 weeks even feeling like I wanted to get home and see friends in the summer. But then by the third week, I was also reading, I brought one book, like The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway, which has this kind of feeling that I can always remember to it of like, of the emotional role of nature in a way you could say. And in the fourth week, like I said, we would do a solo. So I was by myself for 5 days, and I also was fasting and hiking maybe 5 miles a day. And one morning I woke up and there was a baby deer and another, its mom or dad right next to it, like 3 feet away from me. And I was just sleeping on the ground. And that was kind of an epiphany in a way, where I felt so comfortable there and at home in nature, and like a kind of symbiosis, and just drinking water from the river. And I remember getting to the road and hearing the trucks going by, which I hadn't heard any kind of sound except for an errant helicopter now and then. And it seemed so grating and obnoxious, which of course I got back to, but like going to a grocery store and things, it all just felt so alien that ever since then I felt really comfortable in nature. And oftentimes I'm working outside for a few days at least by myself and at night, and it really feels just as comfortable as being home. And I think it's because of that trip.
And so your kind of initial relationship with nature, based on that experience, it was sort of, was it kind of romantic or reverent? Or
Yeah. Yeah, I think there was definitely a reverence I hadn't had to nature before then. And, you know, like I remember in my undergraduate thesis, I was focused on like German romanticism and painters like Caspar David Friedrich. Like, I mean, it was college and now it seems a bit cliche maybe, but I was so, I felt so in tune with that kind of perspective and really related to it. And, you know, reading Nietzsche and things like this, that I guess are stereotypical for a college student, but I really connected to that idea of isolation, but within nature it becomes something else. And that's really what brought me to photography too, like taking pictures of landscapes and embedding myself and feeling like photography couldn't capture that sort of sense that I had when I was in it. And so that's what pushed me kind of through photography to the work I do now, where it's more of trying to have a primary source that I work on in the forest, and it comes back with me rather than transferring it to other mediums.
Well, let's look at some work. The presentation kind of shows just a variety, because you work in a lot of different mediums. So I think it's important for the audience and people who aren't really familiar with your work to just kind of understand the breadth of it. You know, like for instance, it's perhaps unexpected, but this was a project you did. Was this with the Public Art Fund?
Yeah, the Public Art Fund in 2014 in Brooklyn. And I mean, a big part of all the sculpture I do too is really thinking about the viewer's relationship to the work, you know, not just the production of it and then it's completed. The viewer's meant to be an active participant in a lot of ways.
Right. And that we'll talk it's kind of some more about that when we talk about your two pieces in color field. Here's another sculptural piece at Lumiere. And then your photographic work. So when I first learned about you, this is what I knew of you. A little bit less of the sculptural work, but I really find this work fascinating, and just for the sake of the talk, it's a great lead in to the sculptures that we have on campus. So this is one of your large scale photograms, but I think you kind of categorize these in maybe a slightly different way.
Yeah, this one, well, the works like this that I do with moisture and rain are, I consider them more like a printmaking process in a way, or like a monoprint, I guess. The photogram works are a little different, where they're left out in the sun with an object that I've collected from the area, like tires, and they're there for about a year on usually a monochromatic piece of fabric that'll fade in the sunlight. And those ones are large scale photograms, and kind of why I moved to LA to make those. And then these kind of developed a little later, which I use pigment on canvas, and it's a dry pigment that's activated by the rain.
Let's talk a little bit about how you arrived at this process. Kind of, how did you discover this, create this?
Yeah, I mean, it took some time. It really started when I was reading a lot of like conceptual 70s work, especially, and just finishing graduate school. Like I was and still am a fan of Robert Smithson's work, and his notion of the site and non-site, and making works in a specific area to gain site specificity, and then just displacing them back to the gallery in a different way. So I was visiting my mom actually in Vermont, and I hadn't brought any cameras or material with me, and it was a short trip that turned into a long trip for different reasons. And I wanted to start making work there. And like I said, she makes paintings herself, and I took some of her raw pigments outside, and I had got drop cloths from Home Depot, which were kind of like the only art materials I could get my hands on immediately where she lives. And the farm where I grew up is filled with ferns in these big fields. And so I cut a swath of the ferns off and put them on the canvas or drop cloth with the pigment, and then it rained and it set the dye around it. And so at first I was just using like a single species that seemed iconic for the area. And when I got home to LA, I used palm fronds in the same way. And so it was more of a conceptual agenda of how to locate yourself. And then that grew to different places and doing residencies in different countries and finding plants that were native to that area. And slowly I expanded, I guess, from using just a single species to picturing an area. Like this one is from Griffith Park with the palms and some old growth, like plants from California that are in the area, and trying to create an image. And also, like, often I'm working at night, especially in California where there's no rain, and just using the mist that's in the air like late at night to set the dye. So the colors then also became relevant to creating more of an intentional setting, I guess.
And you also use, so it's not all just plant, and really, is that lace?
Yeah. The lace started actually when my grandmother passed away, and we were packing up her house, and I wanted to make a portrait of her. Her house was she lived with us, so at my mom's house, and so I did it in the same area and used the lace, and then it kind of expanded from that. And during quarantine, especially, trying to work in our backyard and making more domestic pictures to accurately kind of represent the life I was living.
Yeah.
Yeah. So personal elements kind of became intertwined, and also, you know, as I became more involved with this type of work, I was looking at a lot of art historical references from Botticelli to, I mean, all the way up through photography, Henry Fox Talbot and things like that from the ferns, but also just the symbolism that was really used in like Victorian poetry and plants and, religious symbols. So I kind of tried to mix that with my own present day life and how the plants like are still the same plants that were used to represent fertility or passion and things like that from our own garden, you know.
Here's an image of you actually working.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is fascinating. So talk about like the duration of these. Like how long does it take to make some of these? I thought the other day you were saying like, I mean, some are a day, some are a month. Did you say you've left things out for a year?
Well, the year-long works are the sun works, which are different. And yeah, I have done that. I'm not sure. We haven't seen an image of one yet, but sometimes those will take 2 years depending on the substrate. And the substrate is meant to kind of mimic the area. So like when we first moved to LA, I collected tires in Highland Park where we were living because they were just around on the streets discarded.
Mm-hmm.
And I would use like a polyester fabric versus an organic cotton that I used out in Topanga when I was using firewood that I collected from the area. The rainworks like these will be outdoors for the duration of the storm. Once it begins, like I can't move them because of the water and the way the pigment works. I'll just leave them, and it could rain for a day or a few days or an hour, and then expanding upon like the original works where I would use a single species to represent the area, I would also do like a single storm. But I started doing multiple exposures actually when I was working on this project for the Hammer Museum, where I went to every national forest in California. And at the time we had our first young baby at home. So if I drove up to Klamath in Northern California and it rained really hard for 2 days and washed away the image, I couldn't drive home and then come back again. Like I had to make it work. So I would just do it over on the same piece of canvas. And I realized that doing multiple exposures, I could kind of reach this foreground and background. Like the images that were done first would get kind of blurred out by the following rainfalls, and the last exposure with pigment would be sharper. And I would use different plants and say do like the grasses and flowers the first time and then do more trees and stuff the second time, so you could not only have this sharpness, like a focal length feeling, but also this idea of moving through a space in the different plants.
Yeah, I mean,
So that, yeah.
I see that you get this kind of density and just like you said, this depth of field. So like you're almost like you're looking through a forest at night or something.
Yeah. Yeah, and you do get, this with the pigments building up from every exposure, they get darker, but I like that, and it really does feel more accurate to the way I'm working, which is usually overnight as it's raining or something. Like I can't really stop once it starts, and there is something to the density of it that does mimic being inside a forest.
Yeah. And so the ones that take a year, how do you have kind of, where do you do those? Like, how do you make sure your materials don't walk off or disappear in that long period of time?
Yeah, well, they do. I mean, that is that is part of it. And if I'm doing it, say in a national forest, I really go out of my way to find a place where I don't think anyone else will go and camp there. And I just mark them with the GPS. They're not always there when I return. And then I'll do them, yeah, in place. I think it's just the the more that I need the work, if I have, for example, a deadline, the farther I go.
Do you go alone?
Yeah, usually. I don't want to subject anyone else to being stuck outside, and I never know what the weather will be like. I mean, I have an idea of it, but for example, it can be really windy and blow everything away the first night. I have to stay again, and I don't fix the plants to the canvas at all. So it really is built up to chance. But again, that's also a big part of it for me, is not just picturing the flora, but the environment. If I'm doing it on a mountain, it will be windy and I'll have to
Right.
deal with that, and the image will be different. And I think that's more of an accurate picture of the area too.
Yeah, that's true. And I'm guessing in a lot of ways you're documenting everything that's happening there, on the canvas.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that was something that took me a while to let go of, because it does become more abstract, and I came from ultimately a photographic background where I wanted a distinct image. So letting nature take its course and perhaps lose some of the representation was hard at first for me, but then I did start to feel more like it was an honest representation.
Yeah, because it seems like you have a keen interest in, like removing the mediator from looking at art.
Yeah.
And kind of approach, really kind of does that to some extent, because you make decisions about which you make plant choices, you make color choices, you make composition choices. It's just left up to chance and the environment and whatever's going to happen over the course of that exposure, whether it's the sun or rain. um, I mean, I find that fascinating. So it's like you the ingredients and then you just sort of step away. And it happens.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And like some of my favorite pieces that I've done recently, like in the fall in upstate New York, I would go in the woods and leave a canvas for about a month under a maple tree that was shedding its leaves, and go back like once a week and put new pigment on, but I wouldn't move it. And not only was I not placing the leaves on by hand, like that, it was just however they landed, but the wind would sweep them away or not. And I really like the idea of uh, removing my hand, as you said, and I
Yeah.
think that opens up more space to the viewer.
Yeah. We actually have a question about color. So someone from the audience says, "Hi Sam, you mentioned the significance of the plant material, flora, and environment that is folded into your works on canvas, making time, place, and environment, and chance. But this work likes me for its vibrancy and color. Is there a significance to your color pigment selections?"
Yeah. So in the very beginning, there wasn't, and I was coming at it from that angle of removing my hand. So I would actually just use whatever pigments for the very first one that my mom had, and scatter them at random. And they're in these smaller bottles, so it takes a lot of different packets to make the work, and I'm just kind of grabbing at random. But and to qualify that, to like say the reason I used multiple colors instead of say just using black to make the picture was that the interaction of the colors really explains the movement of the water. If it were all black and it seeped together, you wouldn't really see the distinction as well. So it's more of like a delineating tool to use the color, especially in the beginning. And then now, as I've tried to have more of a relationship to the landscape via color, I'll like this one, for example, was in outside of Tucson, Arizona, and you can see the stones around it, and the color of the wildflowers were pinks and oranges. And so I would use that too now to more mimic the landscape.
Gotcha. So I'd like to talk about the pieces in color, because I think this whole conversation kind of really helps explain the sculptures to people, because your interest in time and exposure and chance and the public's interaction work, like with the bench that you did for the Public Art Fund, all that kind of plays into this. So this is Maze campus. We've just got a couple of images of it, kind of taken also at different times of day, different, like earlier in the year, later in the year. This piece is fascinating to me, not just the form, but the color choices, the finish, the kind of paint you chose, how reflective it is. So do you want to talk about Maze? Maze is also, this isn't it. Like this has gone through many incarnations. It's been exhibited in many different kind of, in lots of different places around the world.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the origination of this piece was how one of my main interests is time. And I think coming out of photography, I still really am connecting to the precepts of photography, which would be light, time, and exposure, and just abandoning the professional tools of photography and supplementing it with other mediums. And so when I was really first thinking of how to make a sculpture that could connect to photography and especially time, I ended up here because I discovered that, when they do this powder coating, which is really a common tool for public sculpture, there is an element that's put into the color, like a chemical that makes them color fast, and you can just as easily take it out. So the interior of the sculpture is the same color as the outside of the panel for each respective panel. It looks the same, except it doesn't have that chemical mixed in on the interior side. And as you saw in, I think, the first picture, the shadows that are created by the geometry of the sculpture are dictated, by its own shape. And so over time on the inside, you can imagine too, it fades slowly over years in a way that represents those shadows and the way light moves on the interior, whereas the exterior has the color fast element and it never changes color. So you have almost like this long-term exposure that has a constant as the exterior and the variable on the inside, like a long-term sundial or something. And then
Right.
the inside also has this, you can go inside it and you see the slits that are cut into each of like the outermost panels will let light in, and they also send in this microcosm of, as I see it, change happening faster. So every day you see this slit of light moving around the inside, kind of as you would in a sundial or reminiscent of that. So this macrocosm of light and time and deterioration in a way on the colors. And then every day you see the light moving through the inside with its entry through the slits in the panels.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We wouldn't just have just those slits, and they work in such a curious way, because you can sort of peek in, like you can peek out, but then also depending on the time of day and the intensity of the light and the cloud cover, they also like are created through those cutouts. Like the kind of lavender purple panel on the left. One day I was walking by there, and that sort of pinkish color, the sun was that day, it made it look like that diagonal cutout was a strip of neon on the side of the panel. Like, it was fascinating what was happening with the color. And I mean, I like the piece is it's so dynamic to me, not only because the color combinations are fantastic. They're highly reflective, so you just see yourself in it as you're walking around. But they're also so flat, and the whole piece is so geometric. It flattens out sometimes too completely. Like it gets distorted. It almost looks two-dimensional sometimes.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, I think so. And that was something that actually took it, kind of like I was saying, with the rain paintings and letting things go and not trying to be too didactic with the work. Like, originally they were much more angular, and I had these agendas of geometry to make a point, but the more simple it gets, you're right, the more the simplified geometry of the minimalist arrangement can play tricks on your eye, or just with your reference to space that is so, in a way, like built in and through, especially like a Western institutional setting of 90-degree angles, and you have these expectations of what you're going to see, and you can, like, even through the door here, you start to feel like it's the interior is coming out towards you, even though it's receding.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's a slow process, and it does take time. And there's different, like, for me, I was thinking a lot about Dan Graham's pavilions that have that play with visibility through the panels, and then also a lot about Donald Judd's aluminum sculptures, which is what kind of led me to use these. And I'd spent time in Marfa right before making these, and feeling like Donald Judd's aluminum sculptures were really the best part of geometry and minimalist design, but kind of very cold and not connected to the human element of life, of everyday growth and change and movement. So I tried to kind of engage that, and also, of course, color.
So while we're here, we have another question. Do you make models or maquettes of your work before you create them in full scale? And if
Yes.
so,
yeah, I do.
how much do they sort of differ through that process? So yes, that's the answer.
Not much, actually, but that's.
Oh, you don't?
Yeah, I do make them, but the final sculpture ultimately becomes pretty close to the maquette, which I guess that's the idea. So it takes a lot of experimenting and testing with small panels, and I even do get like little 1-foot versions made, powder coated and everything.
All right, well, let's talk about Chimes, your other piece on campus. So we have some precursor images. So you've tried out this idea. I'm sorry. So why don't you talk about the inspiration for Chimes?
Yeah, these images are from a project I did earlier that I made wind chimes with raw metals that they were exactly the same size and had the same notes and sound, and they're with raw steel and copper. And then I hung them in every national park in California, so that they all started out fresh in these national parks. And then a year later, I collected them. So the one on the left you see is in Joshua Tree, and the one on the right is Los Padres, right south of Big Sur on the coast. And they oxidize depending on their location really differently. As you can imagine, the one in Joshua Tree was almost exactly new when I went back and retrieved it, whereas the one on the right was really rusted out and the copper was green, and they made different sounds afterwards. So that was something I was interested in in representing not just that change from the environment, but the sounds that could resonate from it. And that, yeah, that was the precursor to the larger chimes.
So this is the piece on campus. And for those who haven't seen it, it's a pretty large scale. I think it's about 12 feet tall, 4 feet square, something like that.
Yeah, I think a little taller even. I think maybe the red one, is the chime is 12 feet and overall, yeah, it's a little bigger.
Mm-hmm. And so this, like Maze and your interest in time and exposure and physical activity and remnants of interactivity is it kind of all happens here too. So you're inviting people to participate. I mean, just by the nature of it being this oversized musical, becomes a musical instrument almost, instead of just something that
Mm-hmm.
people just hangs, you know, off your back.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, I really enjoyed the idea of interactivity, and then having something that could not only be interactive, but over time change a little bit. The interior kind of, they call it the banger and the wind chime biz that they hit upon to make the sound, is made out of a hard aluminum so that it does cut kind of a line through the color on the chime over time, and you see the site of the sound in the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the physical activity is part of the work and part of the process and experience for all the viewers that come after the previous viewers. So like when we received this, we kind of fully restored it, knowing that these things were going to happen and these marks were going to be made over time. And that's all part of the intent, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's something that's often denied in visual art, especially not just the process or use of art over time, but that kind of, to me, has a really important relationship to the idea of life. And, you know, in a way, like scars can be memory. And so to start fresh with each time it's exhibited, but over time it becomes, you know, if you're someone who's walking that path to class every day and you hit a chime, like, you well recognize it and not just have a new relationship to it every day, but a familiarity with it. And, you know, I don't know, there's no there's a certain freedom to it too.
Okay. Well, we've got a couple of other questions. So one is, I'm assuming you work with fabricators for the sculptures, making these a collective process, yet your works on canvas are solitary in the sense that it's just you and the elements. So do you work with fabricators on these large pieces?
Yes,
Do you like that
I
process?
do. Not really, to be honest.
Oh.
uh I think there's certain ideas that just have to be done that way. And if the encouragement comes from feeling like I want to do it so bad that it must be worth working with fabricators. But I prefer to work alone and outdoors.
Gotcha. Well, that's it for the questions. Maybe some more will come in, but we've got a little more time. And something that you and I sort of touched on when we first talked was this idea of documenting change in your work. And I guess this kind of goes for photography, sculpture, like this keen interest in documenting time, but then sort of ending up with this sort of fixed image. And it seemed like that was sort of an interesting quandary, maybe not a quandary, but just something actually given thought to.
Yeah, and it is something that I've really thought a lot about. And I have made durational video work, but it seems like that would lend itself more towards what I want to do in a way, which is picturing time. However, I think there's a more important limitation that yields a kind of work that can have the kind of presence I hope to achieve in a singular object, where there is this compilation of time spent with a single piece of work that builds up and hopefully kind of capitulates in a way. And it's definitely a difficult thing that I see, is how you can present time in a singular work. But I also have this kind of reverence to art history and especially painting and sculpture, and how there's like this indebted time that can hopefully work towards something bigger. Like my friend and I were talking about that movie Sherman's March from like the late 80s, that approaches this idea to documentary filmmaking, and rather than creating a narrative work, presents more like the problem of someone trying to capture something specific. And so I think I'm really attracted to the problem of representing time rather than the solution, maybe.
Yeah, I think I thought you had made kind of an interesting analogy too to music. Like you had you were sort of envious um, musicians or singers who could sort of like capture this sentiment really beautifully in like 4 minutes.
Yeah, I've always been jealous of musicians, and I think it's the one other thing I would love to do, just to have that kind of urgency bottled and shared, which I think is, visual art is a much slower burn, for better or worse. So I'm always like trying to appeal to that in a way, and it's very influential on me listening to music. And I'll often listen to the same song over and over if I'm driving to go make a work and go camping, and then I don't listen to music while I'm working. But like to create a specific feeling, for example, and it's been like with kids too, it's just been really useful as a tool to go from dropping kids off at school to making artwork, and you have a limited time frame. And so I think music, yeah, has a much more immediate element built into it, and a universal thing, which I find encouraging, but very different than art, and another thing I think about a lot.
Yeah, there are a lot of simulators, but a lot of differences. Sometimes I think music can make you feel things differently than kind of looking at a piece of art or experiencing a piece of art. It's just different. Neither one is good or bad, good or better than the other. We have another question. In creating the photograms, do you pay attention to the botanical science or symbolism of the plants you use, or do you focus mostly on their shape? I think you touched on that a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I mean, it's really both, because a lot of the plants that I'll be using won't necessarily have a Western symbolism or Eastern, but like canonical symbolism built into it in art history or poetry. But a lot of them do, especially in like a domesticated garden with like roses and tulips and irises, and so I do pay attention to it. But of course, a lot of what I'm doing is a lot of the work itself is taking the plants and trying to reduce them to a 2D image, which is, you know, a very laborious process actually. And so, you know, ferns, I can see why they were used in early photograms. They're very flat and detailed and make a beautiful image, whereas like an iris is so rounded, it's hard and it takes more time, but it weighs itself out in my mind with the symbolic reference. So it is both sides.
Well, so with all these color talks, you know, since we're at a university and we have a pretty significant art department, we've asked artists if they have any sage advice for young art in this art world right now. Like, what are some things that you've learned that you would like to pass?
I guess I think the thing over time that I've learned the most is that people just want you to be yourself and be free. Like, I think art occupies a specific place in society that's a bit outside of most things because everyone wants that to exist. So say today with our specifically heightened political climate, there's kind of a weight put on artists to maybe deal with that, but I think that you're already dealing with that quite often before you know it. So, well, I don't know what that means, but I think that the artists shouldn't worry too much about what they're doing because you're already in it usually before you know it. It's more important to just do it and do it every day.
Yeah, I think that's good advice, to just
I don't know.
be yourself, because that's what makes interesting
Yeah.
art, the sort of uniqueness of what you do and how it separates you from other people. No matter how weird or odd you
Yeah.
might be in the moment, just do it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's usually the best. The weirder, the better.
I'm in agreement with you on that. Well, thank you, Sam. I really appreciate you having this conversation. It was a pleasure getting to know you. And audience for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. And we will say good. A short
Thank
survey.
you so much.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. And thank you again, Sam.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good one. Bye.